welcome to CG Seminar 170, the 38th in our webinar series. I'm Maia Chankseliani. I'm an Associate Professor of Comparative and International Education here at Oxford. Today's CG webinar is on university research capacity development in post-Soviet countries. We will have an opportunity to learn about the research capacity development at universities in Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Russia. The findings presented today emerge from a research project that I co-lead together with Igor Fedyukin and Isak Froumin from High School of Economics in Russia. Before I give you some context on this international collaborative research project, there are some brief housekeeping points to mention. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted online on the CG website in due course. A transcript of the chat function conversation will also be posted. Please keep yourself muted unless you have been asked to speak or ask a question. There is no need to have your video on during the webinar, but please do turn on your video when asking a question. We recommend using the speaker view so you can more clearly see who is talking. To ask a question, use the chat function and write out the question you wish to ask. At the end of the presentation, if your question is selected, you will be invited to ask it yourself directly. When invited to ask a question, please unmute yourself, switch on your video, and state your name and where you are from. Thank you, Trevor. So let me now tell you a few words on the research that will be presented today. This panel is, in a certain extent, a continuation of the CG webinar that was held on the 29th of October, where I presented some novel findings emerging from a bibliometric analysis of the research output from the former Soviet countries. The recording of that panel is available on the CG website. Today, we are focusing on qualitative case studies from 3 post-Soviet countries, Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Russia. These case studies, as I already mentioned, emerge from our ongoing collaboration between the National Research University High School of Economics and Oxford University. This is an international comparative project that brings together 22 collaborators from many different countries. 6 of us are here, part of the panel today, and a few others are in the audience. Welcome, everyone. This project explores the ways in which universities in the former Soviet countries internalized their research mission in the last 3 decades following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. This is a rather important question to address, as Soviet universities were primarily seen as educational institutions, while the Soviet science was concentrated in research institutes. These research institutes, including the institutes of the Academies of Sciences, as well as industry research institutes where applied science was conducted. It has been argued that the research mission was removed from Soviet universities in the 1930s in order to depoliticize university spaces. Now, the Soviet model of research organization with research institutes as central originates actually from Germany. Germany is also the place, interestingly, where the first research-oriented universities emerged in the second half of the 19th century, following Humboldt's vision of the unity of teaching and research. In Germany, as well as in other countries in Europe, such as France, research institutes remain important producers of knowledge. Our emerging quantitative findings from the bibliometric analysis, as well as the interview-based evidence, show that in a number of post-Soviet countries, universities have become key institutions producing research. The examples of such countries are Georgia, Estonia, Lithuania, Kazakhstan, and Latvia. The process of institutional reorganization in these countries was driven by the goal of establishing the so-called knowledge-based economies and increasing global competitiveness by connecting research and teaching at universities. Yet, in some countries, including Armenia and Russia, research institutes seem to remain very important institutions if not key players producing research. Even in such contexts, universities have been going through considerable transformations, and our case studies today will offer some nuance on these transformations. I would like to stop here and introduce Sona Balasanyan. Sona is Associate Professor at Yerevan State University in Armenia, and Sona will be presenting on higher education research capacity development in Armenia. Sona, over to you. Sona, you are muted, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Thank you, Maia, for the introduction. I'm welcoming the participants of the webinar from Armenia, Yerevan. I will share my screen now. I will be presenting on the topic higher educational research capacity in Armenia. Just to give some brief information on the country, just a second. Armenia is a landlocked country in the southwestern Asia, located between Turkey and Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Iran. It has a population of over 3 million. The vast majority of the population is Armenian, 98.1%, with a small Yazidi minority and others. Major research governing state body of Armenia is the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture, and Sports, with the Academy of Sciences, the Supreme Certifying Committee, and State Committee of Sciences. These are all established by the government of Armenia. There are 51 higher educational institutions, 27 state, 4 interstate, and 24 private, with around 69K students and 7K academic staff members in Armenia. I put some state university pictures here for you on the right. The first one next to the map is Yerevan State University. The one underneath is Yerevan State Medical University. And then we have the branch of Yerevan State University, economics branch, and then linguistic university. And the last one here in the corner is the American University in Armenia. I'm presenting.
Sorry to interrupt, Sona. Would you like to put presenter view so that we see full slides? If you
Sure.
press it. Thank you so
Sure.
much.
Better now. Thank you. Yeah. I'll continue. The research I'm reporting is based on qualitative research. I used document analysis and key informant interviews. For document analysis, I used legislative documents, annual reports of higher educational and scientific institutions, as well as other research institutions like think tanks and analytical centers, their websites, announcements. For key informant interviews, I gathered reflections of academic staff members, policymakers, and academic and research leaders holding management positions at higher educational institutions from different subfields: humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. It is argued that Armenian higher education is maintained through independent or personal strategies of individual researchers. These individual strategies are realized in the context of limited operational autonomy and lacking institutional autonomy of higher educational institutions. These problems have come to exist from the evolving nature of higher educational landscape in Armenia. Higher education in this country witnessed the post-Soviet, post-Bologna, post-revolution, and now even the post-war developments and associated reforms and changes. And all this resulted in the absence of research mission of the universities. So referring to our research question, it is important to highlight that academic self-governance became important in Armenia because personal strategies of individual researchers are at work without overall research mission of the universities and institutions they work at. And this in turn led to problems of translating state law on higher education into research policies, lack of collaboration in research, need for clarifications in research ethical standards, and academics paradoxically feeling they have academic freedom in not yet autonomous research institutions. So this brought the research development to a specific condition where it lacks a clear structure or focus. I'm quoting a researcher, quote, "Let's have a look at how many reforms we've had in the 30 years since 1991. We are constantly reforming and are tired of this," unquote. Moving to the context where this academic self-governance is emerging, which is very unique to this country, I have to make note on the issues of research collaboration. There are several reasons why research collaboration became the major problem of Armenian research community. One of these being research institutions seeking to get established, attract more funding or donations, and yet networking between the research institutions and synergy of research projects maintains a problem. Key traditional actors in research try to maintain their positions each on its own. All of the key actors in positions to monitor and promote research reforms in Armenia have accentuated the problem of this broken link between the Academy of Sciences and universities, science and teaching. Examples of this include the question whether to maintain or eliminate the post-Soviet doctorantura and have only postgraduate PhD level research phase, or keep the system as it is with candidate of sciences and doctor of sciences. So this is a question that is still debatable and illustrates that marriage of science and research in higher education will not be easy in this country. Traditionally, STEM researchers have had more state attention and funding than those in social sciences and humanities, and most of the higher managerial positions in science and education are held by STEM representatives. To provide you with some concluding thoughts, regulatory mechanisms are needed in Armenia to assure the links between state, university, and researchers' priorities across sciences, especially for social sciences and humanities. And research shows that this, coupled with self-initiatives of researchers that have already mostly undergone research training and education abroad, thinking strategically for institutions, doing teamwork, co-authoring internally, not externally, not with international colleagues, but among themselves, and collaboration may become one important way of navigating through difficult and transitional times of Armenian higher education and science, advancing the already existent elements of academic self-governance. And I will finish with a quote from a researcher. Quote, "There is a problem that exists in all universities, the individuality of governance. That is, everything is decided by persons. The responsibility of research governance is on a person. It is not shared," unquote. Thank you. This is the end of my presentation, Maya. I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Sona. Thank you. We will be moving now from Armenia to Kazakhstan. And we have two presenters from Kazakhstan, Olga and Gulzhanat Gafu. Olga is a DPhil student at the Department of Education at Oxford. Gulzhanat works at the Center for International Programs under the Ministry of Education and Science in Nur-Sultan in Kazakhstan. She leads Department for Strategic Development and Communications, in charge of research and alumni relationships. Please, the floor is yours, Olga and Gulzhanat.
Thank you, Maya. I will start sharing the screen. 1 second. And please let me know if it's been shared properly. I think. Here we go. So thank you, Maya, for the kind introduction. Now, Gulzhanat will give you a contextual analysis.
I think we are seeing your presenter view. Can you share your presentation instead of sharing your entire desktop?
Sure. 1 second. I think this should be the right one.
Yes, just press the presenting view or whatever it's called.
Yes.
Great.
My laptop is a bit slow, I have to admit. So thank you. So Gulzhanat, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Olga and Maia. Unlike Sona, I'm not going to give you much context about what is Kazakhstan and where it is. But due to time constraint, I really want to start with the context of our research. So since independence in 1991, the national government has been actively promoting reforms in the higher education sector, updating and adjusting relevant policies and practices in pursuit of its ambitious goal of becoming one of the world's top 30 economies by 2050, and along with the recent ambition to become an educational hub in Central Asia. This is due to being active in internationalizing higher education sector, as commented on the slide. So the first decade after the independence, the priorities were informed by the objective to transit to a market economy, which allowed more space for private ownership and competition and gave rise to a significant expansion of the national higher education system. As an example, if it was like just 54 public universities in 1990, by 1997, there was more than 150 universities, with more than half of them being private. Since then, 2011, the government's emphasis on the policy level shifted towards promoting research agenda of universities, differentiating existing higher education institutions by their mission, functions, along with the idea of integrating education, science, and industry. The review of the existing narratives in the literature specify that Kazakhstan higher education system in Kazakhstan has issues with corruption, limited autonomy, centralization and equality provision, predatory academic publishing, and stratified funding in higher education. Hence, with the aim of improving the quality of scientific outputs and Kazakhstan's research performance globally, the Ministry of Education and Science has introduced requirements for academics to engage in internationalization of research process, which mainly consists of two interrelated parts. One is a requirement for academics to publish their research in international journals, peer-reviewed, like with high impact factor, and engagement in international research collaborations. So before we really wanted to have more time on findings. So before we discuss this, I would like to briefly stop on some of the indicators I've seen on the slide. The greater share of funding on research comes from the government, which now has the goal to increase expenditure on research GDP-wise up to 1% by 2025. Though, as seen in the graph, there has been a decrease GDP-wise, say due to national currency devaluation from 2015 and later, while the amount-wise it has seen a significant increase. Overall, both in higher education and the non-profit sectors, there has been a gradual decrease in the number of researchers, as also seen in one of the charts. The other two graphs show the number of organizations, including higher education institutions, that are engaged in research, and the number of publications in international peer-reviewed journals, which has increased considerably since 2011. And I think we can leave discussion of these trends to question and answer session, but now I want to pass on to Olga, who will give more time for discussion of findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Gulzhanat. So the main focus of our book chapter and project was to understand how have universities internalized their research mission. So in our findings, we focused on three levels: on how actors themselves interpret research activities, and by actor level challenges, we mean scholars, institutions, universities and departments, and how policymakers interpret this focus. I won't go into details about the methodology, but it is important to note that we interviewed participants in three languages, in Russian and Kazakh and English, as chosen by the participants. They were located in several major cities and regions, and we tried to maintain the balance in terms of gender, for example, representation. So the main findings are as following. The reaction is mixed from academics. So overall finding is that research mission is important, yet many financial challenges to conduct research remain. The views were different from STEM scholars as opposed to higher HSS, humanities and social sciences scholars. Social sciences scholars and humanities scholars expressed their willingness to publish beyond English language and generally assess the situation in positive light, while some STEM scholars have polarly different views, as to say that there is no culture of academic thought in Kazakhstan, and it's actually very different to conduct research in STEM disciplines. Regional universities have similar challenges, yet a specific challenge that was voiced by our participants was in managing to recruit and retain human resources. So the view was that still the human resources remain in big cities and in big centers, urban centers. The university leadership was also confident that research is important, yet financial challenges remains in terms of research funding. If universities apply for national research grants, university leaders shared with us it's very bureaucratic, it's very difficult. Sometimes grant applications are rejected based on, for example, grammar mistakes, and it's just very challenging to actually get the grants. So the lack of structured and clear research governance policies, which is also described very well in existing literature on this topic, was voiced. So, and the main concern was also whether research mission is indeed a top-down exercise and a box-ticking exercise. So, for example, universities would state that they are engaged in the research mission, but indeed, to what extent they engage with it and how they engage with it, it's a different topic. And the policymakers generally viewed it in positive lights, claiming that there is a sustained increase in research productivity in, for example, scholarly publications from Kazakhstan in international peer-reviewed journals. So they say that actually the spirit of active ongoing reforms is high. They are quite excited to keep reforming and modernizing the higher education sector. Thus, the emphasis on the research mission is important, and it will be even more important in the next research cycle. The research funding system is changing, so they say that it will be easier to apply for grants. There will be more opportunities, and while the government support for science is projected to increase, importantly, also the policymakers say that actually higher education institutions have themselves also to get research funding. So they have to be autonomous in that way. So university autonomy is also interpreted in a way that there should be a financial autonomy as well. We conclude our presentation by highlighting that there were some unintended consequences of the push to internationalize research, as for example, engaging with private interlocutors. And we don't have time to go into all of this now, but the question we also pose is that it is not only important to see what results are achieved, but also how are they achieved. So the process of this meeting research agenda is also needs more attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga and Gulzhanat. From Kazakhstan, we will be going to Russia. Igor Fedyukin will be presenting the Russian case. Igor is Associate Professor and Director of the Center for Early Modern History at the National Research University High School of Economics. Igor will be presenting on the Russian case. Igor, over to you.
Right. Thank you so much, and great to be here. And of course, thank you so much to Maia for organizing this wonderful event. Now, talking about university research capacity in Russia, my main thesis, really my main point here is that boosting research capacity of Russian universities became the central project in research in science, technology, and education field in Russia throughout the entire post-Soviet period. And the situation in Russia, I guess, is largely defined by the fact that as the largest of the former Soviet republics. Of course, Russia inherited also probably the bulk of Soviet higher education institutions of various kinds and various types, including over the half of what was officially defined in the Soviet Union as research-intensive higher education institutions, right? So this created a situation, of course, where there is a large higher education field with a significant number of research-intensive institutions. On the other hand, Russian Federation also inherited probably the bulk of the old Soviet Academy of Sciences, with its institutions and infrastructure. So this created sort of another very powerful kind of pole of research. And in many ways, it is this kind of tension or duality between higher education and higher education sector and academic sector as to, well, corporations or corporate bodies or to sectors which sort of competed for the role of the the main platform for research, probably defined the dynamics throughout the post-Soviet decades. Now, having said that, I would like to go one step back and to sort of take an issue with our very common assumption that in the Soviet Union, research was separate from higher education. Because it is really sort of, I mean, it is true to a large extent, but also the situation was probably a bit more nuanced. And what I mean by that is surely, I mean, this idea that, in the Soviet Union, universities were mainly, teaching institutions and research was done at the academy. That's what we hear in the literature, that's what we find in the literature, that's what we hear a lot from reformers in all those post-Soviet countries who sort of promote universities as the main hubs of research and and present it as sort of switching to the Western way of doing science, that is, switching to science research being done mostly at universities. Well, I mean, the fact is that under the Soviet Union, it was never recognized as a doctrine that, that universities should not be doing research. I mean, there's no single policy document from the Soviet period, at least from the 1930s, which would state that, higher education institutions are mostly teaching institutions. In fact, all those documents repeatedly stress that that all faculty must do research, that research is inseparable from higher education, over and over and over again, throughout the decades. The Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and all those other authorities, they do promote and encourage universities to do research. And as a matter of fact, in theory, yes, but at least in theory, all the faculty members were supposed to spend about half of their work time on research. Of course, it was probably never the case, but then again, it's probably never the case, at our modern research universities, even though we all have, those nice time budgets which specify, how much time we should spend on research. So, all the universities, sort of, at least on paper, try to do research or expected to do research. They had the research labs and the research institutes. They had research plans approved and promoted, and so on and so forth. So they engaged in contract research, doing applied research for the for factories and various Soviet agencies and so on and so forth. So that was important part of their kind of everyday life, of their everyday activity. Of course, there were some institutions which were much more research intensive, and some of which were recognized as such and promoted as such. by the Soviet authorities, and there were probably some others which were, sort of less so. Still, and of course, it's important. It's an important point that we simply lack data to really assess, how what was the quality of this research, how it compares to the research done by the Academy of Sciences or by the industry institutes. I would probably agree. I mean, it's certainly true that the academy was the main research outfit where most of the research happened, right? But the universities were expected to do research. So against that background, it's really sort of interesting to observe that immediately when the Soviet Union collapses, at least in Russia, with the reformers, throughout the generations, throughout different ministries and cabinets which replace each other, really kind of followed one and the same line that it is the research at the universities which should be promoted and encouraged, which was seen, of course, as as an implicit or sometimes explicit attack at the Academy of Sciences. That was often read as a sort of policy of shifting research from academies, from the academy to the universities, as opposed to promoting universities. A number of important initiatives were implemented throughout the decades. I would mention only very few of them. Is the creation of the so-called federal and national research universities, the so-called 5-100 program to promote globally competitive flagship research universities in Russia, so-called because the goal was to place at least 5 Russian universities in the top 100, top 100 section in the global rankings. Those programs included, giving specifically designated funding for research to universities, training and replacing and improving academic and research administration at universities, promoting mobility. A very important theme that ran throughout the 3 post-Soviet decades was the promotion of competitive funding, competitively distributed funding, that is grants and other competitive programs, which were again often seen as an implicit or explicit attack at the Academy of Sciences, in the sense that those programs were open to all researchers and all institutions, rather than only to the researchers of the Academy of Sciences. So that very fact that some funding is not channeled directly to the Academy of Sciences, but rather sort of put on a table for anyone to grab, was seen as an attack on the, or could be presented as an attack on the Academy of Sciences. Of course, the introduction of quantified
summary, Igor, sorry.
Right, yeah, right. So where are we now? A couple of short points. One thing, it is really sort of interesting to observe how this idea of promoting the university research capacity, sort of how it was upheld throughout the 3 decades, yet acquired different meaning throughout those 3 decades. What does it mean to promote university research capacity? Does it mean to emulate, the Western model? Does it mean to make science more transparent and accountable? Or does it mean perhaps making science more manageable and more controlled politically, in a sense that universities are seen as more kind of open to direct administration by the political authorities, as opposed to the Academy of Sciences, which is a sort of a closed corporation. Academy did survive and doing rather well. I think an important outcome of those programs was that was a stratification within the higher education field, right? Sort of much more clear delineation between research-intensive universities which receive additional funding and all other institutions which perhaps do not receive this sort of which are less, which are not as well funded or very poorly funded. Finally, probably what we're observing now, what we're beginning to observe now, and what will probably be the defining sort of feature of the next decade is the sort of kind of stepping back from this exclusive focus on promoting university research at the expense of the academy, and sort of seeing it and presenting it as the university and academy as two sort of complementary, well, stages or platforms for doing research. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor. Thank you very much. Now, before we open up the floor to questions, I would like to invite Isak Froumin to give a few of his reflections on these 3 case studies. Isak Froumin is the head of the Institute of Education at the National Research University High School of Economics in Moscow. Isak, I would like to pass the floor to you.
Maia, thank you very much. And my warmest greetings to my collaborators for this very interesting project, and to all colleagues who participate in this seminar. I see a lot of familiar names, and we are looking forward to hear your opinions. When we initiated this project together with Maia and Igor, we asked ourselves what were the real changes at the universities. It's not just renaming, it's not just blah, blah, blah about research mission. Because, and that's very important, what we learned. So the question was, again, can we get some new insights, new knowledge about the nature of universities and their development when we observe this striking transition from one structure to another? In our earlier book on 25 years of the transition of higher education in post-Soviet countries, we observed significant changes in the overall landscape of universities. And here we wanted to look into the universities to understand the internal processes, culture, etc. And frankly speaking, we are still thinking, we are still discussing how to answer this question after we collected and continue to collect a lot of interesting materials, facts about the transition, about merger, university laboratories from Academy of Sciences and universities, about new metrics to assess universities, etc. So I'm not ready to give you answer today. Please follow our project and eventually we'll get the answer. But I want to share with you a few thoughts on the matter. First, again, Igor made very important comment, and in fact, many our interviews confirm that. And I probably didn't pay enough attention to the fact that many university professors were quite even upset when we asked them, how do you feel being within the research universities? Many professors responded that we already did our research. We always were researchers. We are scholars. We have our academic degrees like candidate of sciences or PhD or even doctor habilitate, doctor of sciences. So we did our research and we continued. We always did the research. So what changed? And I guess, and my hypothesis is that during this transition, the main difference between the research within the Academy of Sciences and research within the universities, the main difference was very simple. Academy of Sciences had a plan. Academy of Sciences was responsible for the research productivity often within very specific government guidelines. And surprise, surprise, within all ideological boundaries, obviously. So nobody would say that Soviet science was free, but university-based researchers, professors, PhDs, or doctoral students, they had a lot of freedom in choosing their particular topics. And they were not responsible really for number of articles, for economic impact, etc. So when research activities moved to into universities from Academy of Sciences, they brought responsibility for the productivity. They brought new metrics to, they brought accountability, not just responsibility, but accountability for being productive in the very particular sense. And it also affected internal structure of universities, because it's important to mention that Soviet universities, and still many universities in post-Soviet countries, had very specific structure based on the different parts of the curriculum. The chair of, I was students in mathematics, and we didn't have laboratories or research centers. We had chair of mathematics, calculus, or algebra, etc. So this structure didn't fit with the research agenda. So I guess, again, my hypothesis, and I finish with that, is that, again, we are talking not about new research mission, but about very specific understanding of the research and accountability for the productivity within the research mission, very similar to the accountability that universities have for their education mission. Thank you very much, Maia, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. We have quite a number of questions and comments. So I have selected the first 6. So let's go with this first. I will invite first Harley Balsan to ask his question. He has the question to all participants.
Thank you. My question pertained to whether, to what extent all 3 countries had international assistance and collaboration in their reform program, and how hospitable they are to students who get degrees abroad and then return and want to do research or teaching.
Thank you. If we can very briefly respond to this question one by one, we can start again with Armenia, Kazakhstan, Russia, so that then we'll move to the next one. Thank you.
So thank you for the question. I will briefly tell that Armenia became part of the Bologna process in 2005. And one of the major points why the country joined the Bologna process was student mobility and international recognition of degrees. In this, the country succeeded actually, and very few researchers and students had any issues of receiving their degrees and coming back to the country or vice versa. However, there are interesting issues, qualitatively speaking, to refer to how the newcomers are treated in the academia, and why there is an interesting research question now, why the researchers prefer to publish with international colleagues rather than internally together. But I'll leave you here with this research question and pass the word to colleagues.
Olga, would you like to?
Well, I think yes, and maybe Gulzhanat can tell a bit more about the Bolshak program, but I think indeed Kazakhstan now is actively tapping into all of the international education and collaboration projects. It actively invites researchers. So in the post-Soviet time period, of course, Kazakhstan was, as our colleagues Elise Ann and her colleague co-authors say, that they aggressively started the internationalization process. So.
Hi, right, yeah. Harley, so good to hear you. Well, I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, so far, I don't see any issues in terms of people with foreign degrees kind of being reintegrated back into the Russian academia. Whether that will still be the case a year from now or 2 years from now, that's sort of only time will tell.
Thank you. I would now like to invite Mark Johnson to ask his question. I think his question relates to Armenia, Hussein.
Yes, hi everybody. Actually, it's a more general question. It's a pattern that we saw when I looked at a particular program called the Caucasus Research Resource Centers in Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. But it's also a pattern we saw at Nazarbayev University and other high-profile projects like that, which is the young faculty would say that they were able to be very productive during their international PhD work, then for several years after their return, but that it became harder as time went on. It became harder to maintain connections with their dissertation advisors or with their colleagues from the place they did their PhD, that the resources dwindled, the connections dwindled, and their research productivity declined. So I'm sort of curious, it gets at the same question posed by Harley and some others about what are the specific barriers to that and what specifically could be done to maintain those relationships over time?
Thank you very much, Mark. Whoever wants to address that question, perhaps even Isak, if you want to address, or
yeah, no,
please go ahead.
yeah. I guess I'm a bit struck by the way the question itself is framed, in the sense that kind of now, like 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we kind of still see the situation in the post-Soviet space, right, and development of research of academic policy in the post-Soviet space, as defined by this sort of transfer of know-how or methods or knowledge from the West to to the East, right? Sort of how we sort of see this issue of productivity, of maintaining productivity, as defined by being able to maintain your connection with your Western mentor, sort of. And I would propose that we see it in much more sort of kind of your general career trajectory kind of terms, right? I mean, sort of I mean, how would we address this issue, in the U.S. academia? I mean, is that kind of natural that as the time goes by, you kind of lose your biblical cord with you connecting you to your mentor, right? And sort of, while at the same time, your teaching responsibilities, your administrative responsibilities, your family responsibilities kick in. So my point, I guess, is that it really needs to be seen in a much more sort of multidimensional way than just sort of like, oh, whether that scholar is able to maintain his or her connection with his or her Western mentor.
Thank you, Igor. May I invite Karen Johnson to ask the next question, please?
Hello, everyone, and good morning from Texas. I'm really pleased with the panel, and thank you all for your really great presentations. My question is for the Kazakh case, And I was particularly wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what you mean when you say the government is setting out to make Kazakhstan an international education hub. Particularly, I was wondering if a hub means internationalization of higher education, or does it mean internationalization of people by bringing in more people? So I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about that, please. Thanks.
Yeah, if you can. Thank you very much. Yes, this is the project which is aimed at bringing more international students to Kazakhstan and bringing more international campuses, branch campuses to open in Kazakhstan to make Kazakhstan attractive for international students from the region, and by that also boost the quality of higher education. So that's generally is more focused on higher education internationalization. So we have various programs like Go Nomads, where we attract volunteers to have a year in Kazakhstan. We have attracting more international students and attracting more international partners to Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Gulzhanat. Chokwan Laumlin is the next participant who wants to speak, who wants to make a comment. Hi, Chokwan.
Oh, hi. Thank you very much. Thank you. My name is Chokwan Laumlin. I represent those University of Cambridge and Zarbyev University. First of all, thank you very much to all the speakers for fascinating presentation. It's so much food for the top. Education and science. However, I would like to very briefly comment on the narrative we should put in the introduction to the talk. And I'm citing it's considering the Soviet side, because without analyzing properly the Soviet past related to education, it would be possible to judge it now. And it's about centralized machinery of the Soviet science that didn't recognize academic freedom, was uniform, highly politicized, and entirely state-driven. First of all, I think I believe it contains a factual mistake regarding academic freedom. One, the talk is about science, not social research, and the problem is language. It means social research as well. But considering science, or естествознание in Russian, that academic freedom, according to many scientists all over the world, including those who emigrated from the Soviet Union, it's 120,000 people. And many of them were interviewed, and all of them recognized that academic freedom was very developed. So as Isak mentioned before, many scientists were free to choose any academic discipline they wanted to pursue. And officially, science was recognized in April 1931 to be not belonging neither to superstructure or basis, according to Marxism. So it was pretty free. And I think that in today's, for instance, Kazakhstan, where I am from, it's I can see that today's state machinery, science machinery, is much more uniform than it was in Soviet time, because academic freedom is to choose to research whatever you are up to. And the state should provide you means, an instrument, an infrastructure for this. And this is the problem. Once we are talking about the transition from Soviet model, which was Russian, as Maia mentioned before, very foundation. For 30 years, we've been moving towards the Anglo-Saxon model, in which university has been discussed during this fantastic talk, is the center of research. However, the government is not providing the infrastructure for research. For instance, the equipment and all this, it's very expensive. And if in the Soviet Kazakhstan, the level of expenditures, what we talk about, indicators, spend around 8% of GNP for science, or IND, and 5% for fundamental science. It provided all the means for research to be free in research, whatever you're up to. In today's Kazakhstan, if you want to research quantum physics or biology or anything else, simply you cannot do it because it's impossible to do with a pen and paper. You need to experiment. And okay.
So respond quickly.
I would like to emphasize this. This is very important. And more important, science policy is designed not by scientists, by people. They talk about something they simply imagine and have no clue, unfortunately. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chokan. Olga.
Thank you, Chokan, for the comment. And I think we are running out of time at the moment, but yes. I think it is indeed important to see in more details what is Soviet science, what do we mean by it. And for example, I would argue that it was not the same across all post-Soviet space. If we talk about the, for example, core or periphery model, or if we talk about, multiple colonialities that were sort of ingrained in the process. So it's a much more complex topic with multiple interpretations, of course, but indeed, I think what you referred to the introduction, there are, of course, some dominant discourses.
No, it's solid. It's not social research, and it has no social interpretation. Can't interpret the physical fact.
Thank you both. I think we have still a little bit of time left, so I would really like to give the floor to Mohidil Mamasalova, who has a question, I think, for all participants. Please, Mohidil.
Yeah. So you can hear me, right? So good evening from Tashkent, and thank you for all very informative presentations. My question, actually, I've got two questions, but the most important one is that to all presenters. So, when we think of university research capacity in post-Soviet space, so the key word here is university, as we know that research was not a main mission of university in the Soviet Union time. Now I wonder how universities universities in the current states are ensuring epistemic curiosity, which is interest in intellectual excitement of undertaking research among their staff, because we know that mainly there previously just it was in our blood not to be involved more in research but in teaching. And now I wonder, maybe this is somehow linked to the low research capacity, as Maia discussed in the previous webinar, that maybe the lack of epistemic curiosity conditions in the universities can be the main reason for, one of the reasons for low research capacity. Have you ever found such kind of evidence in your findings? Thank you.
Thank you, Mohidil. Whoever wants to respond, I think this is closest to Olga's interest, but perhaps Sona wants to respond since
I will, and thank you for the questions. I will try to also refer to the previous question. When you ask a researcher in Armenia, do you have academic freedom? The answer is yes. When you ask, does your institution have it? The answer is no. And I think this is a very important paradox that arose from researchers in post-Soviet countries in general. It's the paradox is still there because we have this new reality of doing research. And here, coming to this last question, there is motivation, but the problem is, and interest and enthusiasm for doing research, but the problem is how this is institutionalized and how these interests are managed. If you talk to separate researchers, you see this interest, you see how they realize and implement their projects. But when you try to put it into a network and see how these patterns are institutionalized, the problems are coming from here. So I don't see any problem with interest and motivation of researchers for doing research. I see problems of research institutionalization more than that.
Isak, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just two words. When I said that researchers were free, I didn't say that science was free. Let's be very clear. what I said exactly, that university-based researchers could, within ideological boundaries, could choose their topics because they were not accountable for the products. And when you talk about biologists, they did have laboratories in Academy of Sciences and very poor laboratory facilities at universities. So it was a poor and free part of research landscape. So I guess that's important clarification of my position.
Thank you so much, Isak. I would like to apologize to Alan and Marco. Since we have finished the seminar, basically it's 3 o'clock, we have to close now. I would like to thank all presenters very much for participating in today's webinar. And I would like to also thank all collaborators, all the 22 collaborators who are engaged in this project. And thank you to all participants who have been so active, sending so many questions and so many comments. It was great. So in closing, I would like to mention that our next CGHE webinar will be held on Tuesday, 24th of November. We will be hosting Nivedita Sarkar from Ambedkar University, Delhi. She will be presenting on how the COVID-19 pandemic has accentuated inequality in the higher education sector in India. Thank you all again. I hope you will join our next seminar. Goodbye.
Thank you.